Hello, my name is Bob McCabe, and I am a survivor of sexual abuse. The reason we are here today is to go to a message of hope on this topic. We are here to find a new way to talk about, to converse on this topic. I started an organization called Recovery Speaking Initiative because when I was going through healing from this and through the court process and through the trauma counseling, I found that there weren't support networks out there with people with lived experience. And that is so important, in addition to, not in place of, but in addition to trauma counseling and clinical counseling. So I encourage you to watch this, to listen for the message of hope. And if you are a victim of sexual abuse and you're wondering if and how you can come out, I think you're going to find with our 4 panelists today that they're going to show you a blueprint, a roadmap of a way that you can heal. I want to thank Patrick and James of Soaring Profits for facilitating this and coming into Guelph from Peterborough in order to put this together. Our 4 panelists are people who have been there, have experienced strength and hope, and they're going to share that with you today. If you are starting to get traumatized, if you are starting to get uneasy, turn it off. Come back to it later. Take what you can. And at the end of this, there will be the phone number for Recovery Speaking Initiative, the website for Recovery Speaking Initiative, in a way that you can reach out to us so you don't have to walk through this alone. And Patrick and James, over to you.
Thanks, Bob. My name is Patrick.
And I'm James.
From Soaring Profits. And we're here today working with our panel on a message of hope. We're working with Recovery Speaking Initiative as well as ourselves to have a great conversation about recovery and survivors of sexual abuse.
And that is what Soaring Profits is all about, is telling those stories that are hard to tell. Having people come on and not only show us a way forward through a hard road, but also tell their story. And in this case, we have 4 great panelists, 4 people who have been there, who have done that, who are on the other side of sexual assault and have found a way forward and are eager to teach you and show you the way that after sexual assault, there is a happiness, joy, and creativity, which you'll find out very soon. Wendy, Dave, John, and Pamela, I'd like to thank you all for coming and being here to share your past, your present, and of course, your most important future. Dave, our first question today is, there was a point of impact in your life that brought you to decide that my life needs to change. I have to do something different. What I'm doing right now isn't working. And can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Well, there was many points of impact that should have been turning points, and just never did anything about it. So I think the greatest one was rounding the corner into 2020, and I was facing the end of my career with the company that I'd worked for many years. And I was still doing what I was doing, and as I got closer to Labor Day weekend, which was essentially going to be my last trip, let's say, I was still very much the hamster on the wheel, and using hard drugs, just not, it wasn't a good place to be for me, because the trajectory of my life was all over the place. So I had this innate fear that here I am at the end of this career and I'm facing almost like certain death. Whether it was, for me, mostly it was like a spiritual, like mental death. And if I had to kept going, it for certainly would have been a physical death. So that was that was the impact. That was the, oh my God, where am I? Where am I going? So it certainly posed a lot of questions for me, and of course I was just paralyzed with fear, and I didn't know which way to turn, really.
Thanks for sharing that, Dave. I appreciate it. Everyone's journey is different, and a big part of that is why Bob picked this panel, because each of your journeys are different. And Wendy, you had a slightly different journey leading up to this. What was your point of impact to know that, you know what, I can't live my life in this way anymore? What made you go, you know what, it's time that I change?
I think mine, I lived my life that I didn't go down the road of the common addiction story with drugs and alcohol and food or whatnot. Mine was, I was addicted to making my life appear to be great. I was great, my life is great, you know, I don't have any struggles, I don't have to worry about anything. You know, I'm good on the inside and on the outside. I didn't tell my story for many, many years. And the point of impact was the day I got a phone call from the police that someone else had come forward and named me as a possible victim as well. And, you know, they called and said, oh, I just wondered if we could talk about, you know, something that happened in the past, you know, with this person. So I knew right away, obviously, what they were talking about. And at that point, it was like, you know, this way I'm living my life isn't working anymore. And I thought that was a much easier way to live my life, to not tell my story. Let's just keep it in the background. You know, and then just keep moving forward from there, because talking about it was going to be really difficult. But as the process went through, when the police came to my door to talk in person, you know, they came in an unmarked car, you know, everyday clothing. They weren't in police clothing, so like the neighbors weren't talking and whatever. And I knew at that moment that this is it. This is the time that I need to tell my story, and it's time, you know, for him to be held accountable for what he did. You know, and my husband said too, it's like, you know, like, it's up to you. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. And I'm like, no, this is the time. This is the time to change the pain inside and let it go, or, you know, try to let it go and move forward in a different direction, because this isn't going to work for very much longer, because it had already been close to 30 years that I'd been living that way, and I knew in my heart that it just wasn't sustainable anymore. So I didn't hesitate to come forward and, you know, joined in the court process with one of the other victims. And I thought, my mentality going into that was like, this is the court process. He's going to be held accountable, and, you know, my life's going to be good after this. Everything's going to be okay. And I quickly found out that was just the beginning. You know, it wasn't a fix. It was the start of the journey, but it definitely wasn't going to be the fix that I initially thought. It's like, okay, we're good. We're going to go to court. You know, he's going to pay his price. And, you know, that was a really difficult journey that people aren't educated on, of what that's going to look like, how long it's going to take, I don't want to say power struggle, but I still felt through that whole process. It was a 2-year court process.
I imagine that would be like a really tough journey to go through it all and then realize that at the end of that, it still wasn't closure. And that would be a difficult thing to go through.
It still felt like he had the power.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. Pamela, going through a process, you know, we've heard your story, we've seen and, you know, heard your voice and what you've talked about this. What was one of the most powerful pieces to help you get through where you are today in the recovery process?
It's hard to name just one thing, but I would say that having a therapist that knows what they're doing and is trained in trauma, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or post-traumatic stress and sexual abuse was really key for me to find that connection, build that trust with a therapist. And it's not always the first therapist that you find, so I would definitely say to keep searching, because there will be a match for you, and then a support system outside of, because of course, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly, whatever those therapy sessions are, that's a piece to the healing, but it's all the hours, days and nights in between, where you need that support as well. So a really good support system, whether it's other survivors or just people that have, for me, showed what unconditional love is because of the work of working through shame and the honesty of what we had to go through.
Well, and Pamela, I think that exactly what you're talking about there is why we're doing what we're doing today. Trying to get that voice out there and let people know that they're not alone in some of these issues and struggles that they've had. So, John, obviously, going through the traumatic situation that you had as a young person, how did your life change in your recovery piece? What did that look like, and how did it change for you on a daily basis or just the generality of life?
Well, I think that it was a it was a cumulative process for me. Frankly, I came out because I was supporting another survivor of sexual violence. And I had no idea, even at that point, although I knew that I was sexually abused, I didn't connect the dots that I had been sexually abused.
Sure.
So I initially spoke out to support another individual. And through that process, it's kind of steamrolled from there to where I am today, sitting here in front of, with 4 of my colleagues, and we're discussing sexual violence.
Right.
The impetus for me is to impact others. And if you're out there somewhere feeling that perhaps you're alone, I need to tell you, you're not alone. That's maybe a very curt answer to a very complex situation. But I've over time, it's evolved to, where I am today.
Well, I think your answer talks explicitly to that and what we are here today talking about, right? And that little piece of hope, that little piece of advice, to shine that into somebody else's world, I think is super important. And again, I thank you folks for doing what you guys are doing, because it's a beautiful thing that we're doing here today, and I think it's fantastic.
I agree. I know it's our hope that people watching this will get some sort of way forward, a light to follow, because all of you guys have lived it, walked it, and have come at the other side. And that's kind of leads into my next question, Wendy. So at some point, your viewpoint changed. You went through a viewpoint where you saw your story of something that owned you as negatively impacting on your life. Whereas now I find, because I know you well, I know you more than anyone else, you're like my little sister, but now you own your story. You're able to tell your story and share your story, and you're able to lead others into being able to share their story. And I was wondering, at what moment, what point, what changed for you? What changed your lens from, this story really owns me, to I own my story?
I think for me is the first time I wrote my story out for Lisa and 1000 Trees and the Sharing Volume 1, we all chose a charity that we were passionate about and to share, the profits with. And I didn't have one that I was connected to, that somebody that needed it was going to benefit from the profits. So I created my own charity, if you will. So I created an award that's presented to a high school female graduating student from a local high school that my kids graduated from. And the criteria to that was that, she made it through all her life struggles. She persevered, and whether it took her 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, it didn't matter to me. And it didn't matter what her grades were. I don't care if she passed with 90% or she passed with 51. I wanted her to be acknowledged that, she picked up the pieces, she made it through all of those life struggles, whatever it was, and made it to her grade 12 graduation. And this June I'll be presenting my 10th award. I'm still doing it. I don't have any plans of stopping it. And the feedback that I'm getting from pretty much everyone I've presented an award to, and I do it in person now. I don't do it at graduation. I meet with them one-on-one so I can tell a little bit about my story, talk about the book, and then talk about her story if that's what she wants to do. To know that she's not alone. and to make her feel important, because, you know, all the awards are given to those with the top marks. So I wanted her to be acknowledged that, you know, good for you, you picked up the pieces, you're moving forward, and you've accomplished a goal in your life, and you know, hopefully that helps her move forward, you know, in hopefully telling her story and knowing that she's not alone, and you know, it didn't matter.
I think that's a beautiful kind of segue. Like, you're absolutely like, so you took something that for you was someone did something to you, and you were able to tell your story through book form, and then use the proceeds for that story to make something beautiful. And you're absolutely right. I know that through talking to you, some of these young ladies have come back to you and said, I can't tell you how important being recognized for the first time ever is to me. And I get chills even now just thinking about these young ladies who have been through so much and never been recognized, and finally here's Wendy coming in and saying, you know what, I recognize you, I think you're important. And there's
Absolutely.
nothing more beautiful than that. Dave, like I said, we all have our own stories. Was there a point in your life that your lens changed, that you went from, you know what, I feel like a victim, that the story is like owning me, to you could release it a bit, and that you were in charge of that, your own story, and able to, you know, either share it or deal with it in a different way?
Well, I think that that started for me when I was introduced to Bob McCabe and the Recovery Speaking Initiative, and the cathartic effect it started having on me. And I feel like a bit of a pioneer, and I think Bob would agree that when he started the men's group, that was every Thursday night and continues to be, that was that sort of point of turnaround where I was able to feel at home. I mean, it's an online group, but you know, when I would be waiting to let in the meeting on Thursday evenings, it was like coming home, and so I was able to share my story with these 5 men that I had actually eventually had physically written, because it was part of, I had eventually taken on a litigation. Unbeknownst to myself, that was part of the process, is writing about your life before the abuse, and your life after the abuse, and I read it to these guys that night, and as hard as it was very freeing. It was freeing to write it, let alone to speak it. But the Pandora's box that was opened by taking on this litigation for 2 years was, that's what got me over the hump of the story doesn't own me anymore. And through that 2-year process, with my own modalities too, and retreats and that kind of thing, I got to a point where I became not just a survivor, but a warrior. And it didn't have that charge behind it anymore. Of course, my story is my story. I will always own it, but again, it doesn't have that charge.
John, picking up from kind of where Dave was saying there, the stages of going through that, how did those stages for yourself, how did those affect your family and kind of the loved ones and people around you?
Well, you know, it's been multifaceted. You know, it's been a huge journey. Sometimes it's moved quickly, sometimes not so quickly. I'm part of a 12-step community that initially sought support from each other in the fellowship that I belong to, and I reached out and connected with them. But as far as family goes, we weren't so in sync, if you will. So it's been fractured, but it's been, initially it's drawn us together, or cumulatively it's drawn us together as well. So it's a very complicated situation that leaves me with one message to the people. If you are walking alone, then that's a dangerous place to be. You don't need to do that any further. You're able to reach out to any one of us or any person that is empathetic and gets support.
I think that's absolutely true. If
yeah.
you need, like if you want to contact one of these people for support or the Recovery Speaking Initiative,
Absolutely.
you can reach out to Soaring Profits. At the end, you'll see some of our emails. Please do reach out, because these people are wonderful people who have been through it, and not only can they help, but so can the great Bob. And I'd like to see that continue.
Yep. And Dave, kind of just parroting off of where we were with our last question there, is that the pivot from the moment we were like, okay, something needs to change, making that change, addressing that, and then how that affects your family, your loved ones, your community. How were you affected through that, and how was everyone else, your circle, affected around that process as well?
Well, again, it's that cathartic effect, right? It's that healing, and it can take on many ways. But it was a gradual process, and I don't think I recognized it initially. And of course, my hat goes off to my partner Lisa, who saw me through that process. And in passing, we'd be talking, and she would mention something like, "Wow, like you don't react the same anymore. It's not as harsh, or your anger and rage is gone," or things like that, right?
That open wound.
Right. Like it was that healing, right? And so it was things like that, very subtle things. And again, like I have to say that the process of litigation really brought out all of that. My mom, of course, has seen the change. I think it's more of like reiterating what I'm saying.
I think it's totally true. That leads me into my next question. So I think what you're trying to say is that the people around you noticed the change. The way you
100%.
dealt with your anxiety, your stress, your grief. And so that leads me into Pam. Pam, I'm wondering, so you and I had an interview, and it was a lovely interview, and I have some insight into how you dealt with your pain and anxiety and grief and how you deal with it now. And I was wondering, so everyone on this panel has expressed that it's an ongoing effort. At no point does it just go away and you're healed. It's not going to happen. You get better slowly. It's a work in progress. So Pam, have there been moments now where you felt that grief, or you've been triggered by and relived the trauma a little bit? And if so, what do you do for that?
Absolutely, because it's an ongoing, and it's very similar to a roller coaster. So you're going up and you're going down, and sometimes the ride is amazing, and sometimes you're screaming bloody help the whole way down. And so in that spiral, I find that each time I go to a low place, a memory, a trigger, some sort of emotion that is difficult to deal with, and I find myself in a darker place, I have to remind myself of all the tools, strategies, and things that I learned along the way through my therapy, through the healing, through the support of other people, that I have way more in my toolbox than I ever did in the beginning. And each time I spiral down, there's more in my toolbox to look at, to see what kind of works, what fits, what doesn't, for this specific memory or trigger or emotion. And I am constantly reminded by my therapist that, you're not going to stay here forever. It's not going to be as long. And I swear to God that, yes, I am. This is horrible, and I'm not going to get out. And sure enough, sometimes it's 24 hours, sometimes it's a couple days. Whatever it is much shorter than what it was. So each time I'm better equipped to go to those hard and dark places and have more tools and strategies to use to get out of those places that seem hopeless and despairing. And it's important to remind ourselves and to always keep our tools and strategies kind of fine-tuned and ready to use. They're there for a reason.
I think that's an important point. Like, you bring up tools, and the whole thing is that tools work for some people, but not for others. So you have to make your own toolbox. You and I had that discussion that there were tools that you put in your toolbox at first and you're like, no, that's getting out of there. Like it worked maybe, and some of them only worked for a brief time. You talked about smells. You did some smell therapy for a little while and then it stopped working and you had to do something else. So, and you're all so unique and individual, and your stories and what you've been through is unique and individual. You couldn't possibly all have the same toolbox, which leads me into Wendy. I know that you have done a lot of work over the time since your court case to now. So what do you keep in your toolbox? Or do you still have those moments of being triggered or flashback and grief? And what do you do or use to bring yourself back?
100%. I still have those moments. There's still triggers with certain smells, certain thoughts, certain people, names, all those kind of things. But I feel like now, I used to be the person that if I stopped doing anything, then I was going to go to a place I didn't want to be, because it would just bring back all the memories and my brain would just take me to a place I'm like, no, I am not going there. So I stayed busy the entire day, the entire night. My husband couldn't even get me to sit and watch a movie without me getting up 100 times, because I just can't sit. Because my brain just doesn't stop and just takes me back to places I don't want to be. So that was my way of not going there. But now I'm, I kind of practice what I preach, is like take time for myself. I've learned, not 100%, but I learned to say no, I'm good, I don't want to do that. I know that I need rest. I know that I need to just stop and take a moment. And I didn't connect with the proper therapist. I went through 4 therapists before I found one that I connected with, and that she could understand, and she could see the triggers and know that I wasn't okay. She just knew how to read me. That is, let's just stop there, and and she actually taught me how to breathe. I had no idea that I didn't really know how to breathe, and now I know I can just sit and take some nice deep breaths, and then, I still have lots of anxiety, lots of stress, but I learned now I know how to bring it down faster than I could before.
I think what you're all saying, or what I'm hearing from Pam and you and John and Dave, is that you had to take a moment to think of yourselves. You had to take a moment to look inside and put yourself first for a little bit and start a recovery process from that. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Dave, how are you different today now that you've kind of incorporated some of the things that our guests have talked about, your toolbox? How do you find that the tools that you bring to the table, how has that changed your life and some of the projects that you're working on now?
Well, as far as the tools, I've ever since going to a couple of retreats last year, one of them was here in Ontario, another one was in Mexico. Meditation has become a very valuable tool on this journey, I'll say, towards betterment. And it's not selfish. It's like you put that hyphen in there. It's selfish. So self-care has really taken on a bigger meaning for me than I never kind of understood it years ago, but I really get it now. And so I take those tools with me during the day. And what I mean by that is that I can be who I want to be in this sort of journey of betterment before I leave the house. But it's what I do with it, because to me it's all about relationships. It's the one with my significant other, it's the one with my mom, the guy behind the counter at the variety store. It's being that better person. So those, let's say, certain modalities have given me that leg up, let's say, for becoming a better person. And so moving forward from that, I've taken on writing my story. And even though I don't have a lot written at the moment, but I've got an extra little book to sort of, and my mother got me this little book to jot things down as they come. And but what I've written seems to be pretty powerful because I've ran it by some people and they're blown away by it. Not that I'm looking for a pat on the back. It's just, you know, my own self-doubt, my own fear, my own loathing and all that kind of stuff that likes to creep in, that was so implanted all those years, you know, likes to tell me I'm just worthless. And yeah, that's...
Well, so a big thing that I'm taking from that is about taking that control. That you're
Absolutely.
now in a position where you're trying to control your situation as opposed to feeling that almost victimization constantly, right?
Absolutely, because being a victim, I felt out of control.
Right.
And yeah, it wasn't a great place to be.
John, kind of talking about taking over and taking that control back. What are you working on now? What are the things that you focused on in taking that control, owning that, and it now is really spreading a positive vision, a positive message around?
Wow, now that's a very pointed question. So I'm just completing my Bachelor of Social Work in London. So 4 years I've been working diligently towards securing a degree, which I have. I've also worked with Opening the Circle, which is a project that's not gendered. It deals with men, women, gay people, whatever, that are coping with and dealing with the impact of sexual violence. And I was thinking about the levity that we bring. I mean, all four of us infuse a bit of maybe a joyous spirit. But I would think, when I think about that, I think about the global community of sexual violence. We're all in this together. You are in this with me. We're not doing it in isolation. So it's not that, and I'm not sure I'm articulating myself particularly well, but you know, it's not that I'm needing support. You need support.
We all do.
Yeah, we all need support. Right. We all need to have conversations about these most egregious breaches of trust and that demand that we as a society speak out and say, what the hell happened?
Right. And that you're not alone. And I think that's the beautiful thing that this panel has been able to shed for myself, James as well, and everyone else, is that the community that is so important to everyone is that alienated, that isolated, that feeling, it's not real. You have hope, you have that desire to move forward.
Well, and absolutely. In 1996, when I came forward, there were very few people talking about this issue.
Right.
Today, we're having a conversation that involves all of us. We're supporting each other. I hope we're supporting you.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing, and it kind of leads me into my next question. You all had a story, and it sounds like it was that impact for all of you was being able to tell that story for the first time, whether it was to one person, 5 people, or writing a story for the whole world to read. And I imagine, and I'd like the people out there to hear this, because that would be the most scariest thing for me, I think, is revealing to others, people I know, family, people I love, that something happened and it was horrific. And it might be someone they know, someone they respected, someone they care about. And so what I was wondering, Wendy, I know you wrote your story, and Lisa Browning's book, a wonderful woman who supports us all at all times. And I know from talking to you, when you wrote your story and you wanted to lead, you wanted to put it out there, you had some moments of doubt, some moments of thinking, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I shouldn't share with anyone else. I know you and I are like such good friends that it took you a while to even tell me. And I was just wondering if you could like go through for people who are watching that maybe haven't told their story yet, and talk about what your fears were. Like what before you did tell it, what were you thinking was going to happen, and after you told it, what did happen?
When I wrote my story, the women that came together for that book, we all had a chat group going on, and we all supported each other throughout our writing process, and we were all at different stages at different times. And for me, I was afraid to tell my story because of, the stigma around it, not being believed. That's why a lot of people don't tell their story, is because unfortunately some people go through that where they're not believed. And I didn't want that to happen. Nobody does, obviously. But I also felt that the few friends that I had, I've never had a lot of friends, but I've always had some really good ones. I felt that if they knew what was inside and what I've been through, and that they wouldn't want to be friends with someone who's broken. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was like, am I broken? Yeah, I think I am. And I was. I'm not as broken anymore. But I just had that fear that they're like, I'm good. I don't want to be friends with her because she's broken, and I don't want to have any point in that journey to go to those difficult places. And a lot of people didn't know how to support me because they didn't know how I felt. They didn't know what I'd been through. The outcome was very different. I was fortunate enough to have everyone that I told believed me, supported me, asked me what I wanted, asked me what I needed, and were honest with me and said, I don't know how you feel, and I don't know what you need. And I'm like, I'm glad you don't know how I feel, because I don't want anyone to feel that way. But they just stood by me and supported me, and are still friends with me to this day. So for me, that was just heartwarming for me. That is like, okay, these are real friends. These are real family that stick together, and work together to support each other. Mm-hmm. and encourage to tell your story. It's, it does get easier. That is the hardest thing. When I hitting send to Lisa was like, it took me a long time to actually hit that button. My story was done. Now I need to hit send. I'm like, I don't want to hit send, because then it's out there.
Yeah, I imagine there would be a lot of hesitation for the people who are watching to go beyond that barrier, because once your story is out there, you can't pull it back.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you found that once you told your story, it got easier. The people around you who you thought might, like your closest friends who you thought would reject you, in fact, did not, just wrapped around you even closer and tried to find any way to help you because they didn't understand. Pamela, you both had different experiences, so like maybe your story wasn't the same, and I really think it's important that people watching this, like if you all said sharing your story is the most important thing that happened, that was how you started. That's when we were talking about that point of impact. It was mostly being able to share your story. So what were your fears before you shared your story? There must be a moment, when you were thinking, I don't know if I should.
Sure. So I just published my book, The Woman Who Picked Up Her Child, in September. And I had it written probably 2 years before that. But it was a process to get to the place of feeling like, I'm ready. Part of it was more work that I needed to do within myself, and part of it was perhaps work that other people needed to do before the book actually came out. I grew up in the Waterloo County in a Mennonite family, and it's very entrenched in Mennonite heritage and culture, and similar to the Catholic Church in that lots of performance and guilt and shame and secrecy, and so that was no different with my abuse that happened with members, not just of my family, but within the Mennonite community and the church. So I was afraid, terrified that I wouldn't be believed, that it would become a witch hunt for me to prove how wrong I was and how righteous the men were in, they're not even living anymore, but there was that fear. I was afraid of certain family members who just would have a really difficult time, mostly extended family members and cousins and relatives closer to my abusers. So I needed to do a lot of work in preparing myself. I was also afraid of my aging mother, how it would impact her and her health, and where she would be with it. So I also had to work through, do I want to wait until she passes, or when I took that control and realized that this is my story and I need to make decisions for me and my healing, I published it. My mom is living, and one of the amazing things is the amount of healing that has happened between my mom and I through this process. And that has been a journey and another story in and of itself. But the healing in that I never thought would happen, and was terrified for the damage that I would maybe cause her, has been an amazing story of reconciliation, and you know, myself experiencing being hugged like a little girl from a mother who found out her daughter was abused, and that, had I waited until my mother would be gone, would not have been part of my story. So I am forever grateful for that. The comments within the Mennonite community within Waterloo County have been what I suspected, but I do the work, and that they don't have that power over me like they once maybe would have. And for that, I am also thankful. And there has also been a tremendous amount of people who have enveloped me and my story, and have been really sorry for what happened. And I think as a survivor, for me, it's not the impact of being told that I'm brave isn't as big of a deal. I think that John mentioned one time, we're all brave in certain ways, in certain aspects. I think the greatest thing that someone can say to a survivor, at least for me, is, I'm sorry it happened, and I believe you that it did. And so for people that are listening and know that they want their stories to be told, we believe you, and we are sorry that it happened.
Yeah, absolutely, Pamela. And I think it goes to leadership. What we're doing here today is hoping to get some messaging out there and expressing that leadership, that you're not alone. That each individual story that you folks have come forward with, and the communities that it's affected, your families, your friends, all those things, you're leading with your inspirational stories that I don't think enough people get to hear. You know, you hear about a trauma, you hear about something that's happened to somebody's life, but we're focusing on the recovery. And that's what Recovery Speaking Initiative is dialing in, being able to help with the men's groups, looking at the female with the women's groups. I think that's exactly what this whole thing is about. And Dave, I'm gonna kind of go to your question, because the ladies have worked on books. You know, they've used the written word to kind of spread their message. You're in the similar process right now, starting. How has that sort of helped you through your recovery piece, dialing that messaging in, and where do we go from here, whether it be through writing, whether it be through speech, whether it be through different presentations you're going to do? How do you think that you're going to be able to spread that message of recovery?
I think it's like for me, it's a real creative process that has spilled over from starting that book, and what I mean by that is that like, you know, I've picked up my artwork again. I've picked up the guitar playing again. It doesn't, you know, sadly sit in the corner, and, you know, I feel so full of regret and shame that it's just sitting there. Yeah. So all that creative process has started to come out, and you know, maybe in time that will affect other people too. I don't know how. You know, we call it a process, right, and a journey, and I do know that I am having a lot of fun restarting a car project that my father and I worked on. My dad, before he passed away 9 years ago, gave me his hot rod And
Tell me a little bit about that, because we've, in our previous interview, you talked a lot about what that meant to you, breaking down this vehicle, breaking down some of the things that maybe you kind of have some personal aspects in relation to that.
yeah, it was a really tough thing. I got to a point with the car where I was, wasn't really going to do too much to it. And it just, as it unfolded, I started tearing it all apart. And I think there was a lot of angst in me while I was doing that, because I had this kind of fractured relationship with my father because of my own sexual confusion all those years, and my dad telling me that he would never view me as a man because of the relationship I had had with another boy in school. So the car, blew into pieces, and during the process of recovery, I've started to look at it from a different angle, and that relationship with my dad has also been healed. And by putting this car back together, it's like it's the car's own recovery process too. There was a part of it when I was standing in the garage at one time that, because I had a lot of suicide ideation over the years, and not that long ago I was like eyeing a beam in the garage thinking, wouldn't it just be great if I just did finish this now amongst all these parts? That's where I was at, and certainly I'm not nowadays, but yeah, it's just it's really this creative process in me. And I don't, and I know we joked about it a bit before starting, and it's like, who knows, maybe that book will turn into a screenplay. I don't know, but it's exciting. Like, the future is exciting to me now.
Totally.
Right.
And that metaphorical tearing down, rebuilding, that re-up of an opportunity, I think is so important. And every time you have an opportunity at a car show, wherever you are cruising around with your friends and family, to explain that car, it's going to be a beautiful thing.
Oh,
and
it's
that
huge.
keeps that wheels on the track, keeps moving down, next day. I think it's beautiful. Yeah. John, similar type question. You obviously just finished your Master's of Social Work, or your social work degree, sorry, and you're now in a position where you're figuring what's next. How are you inspiring others? We have Recovery Speaking Initiative that you're a big part of here in developing. You're obviously a panelist here today. What's next for you, and how do you think that that's going to help through your recovery to the next phases?
So first of all, I'd like to reach out and say to Dave, I'm very grateful that you didn't decide to end it all when you did.
Absolutely.
And I was also thinking that about people speaking out and I remember coming forward back in '96, and when I was telling my story, I realized then that collectively the story I was telling was no different than your story. It's all our story. It's, I just happen to have the gift of being able to bravely, or maybe naively, speak about things that others don't speak about. So I actually am fortunate. As far as where it goes, I'm writing a book, I'm doing it, whatever. I am living my life today. That's a big deal for me. And I hope to work with marginalized people. I hope to work with the indigenous population, homeless. I have so many opportunities and experiences that potentially will be something important that I don't know where the path forward leads. As I think about it, I think about the glass half full scenario. The glass for me is half full, and there's a lot more to go in there, and I have no idea what it will contain.
I love it, and I think it speaks to some of the stories that we had talked about previously too, is that credibility facet, that when you're going out and you're going to interact with individuals, in whatever facet you choose to next in your life, is that you have that credibility. You speak from a point of empathy, compassion, love, respect, all of those things that a new grad, 22, 23 years old, doesn't have the life experience to jump into that and thoroughly dive as deep as, someone like yourself that has lived experience.
Well, and I think that it's important to hear, to speak less and listen more. We need to hear, again, for people that might, I always think when I'm doing these types of events, that if somebody's sitting out there on the fence, sort of, what do I need to say? What can we say collectively to inspire them to get off the pot, sort of thing?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's.
I totally agree. Like when I was first approached by Bob McCabe about this event, there was a part of me that was like, I don't know what to do for this. Like I'm honored and I'm grateful and I think it's wonderful, but how do I help these 4 people tell their story? And you know what? I'm very happy with how this turned out. I think it's been a wonderful process. I think we've taken away that we need to use multiple tools to recover. There's not just one direction for one person. Everyone has their own story. The point though is to tell your story, to get out there, find that one person maybe to start with, find multiple people to start with, start writing if that's what you have to do. And once you start telling your story, find others who have survived what has gone on. These wonderful people, panelists right here, you could find them, Recovery Speaking Initiative. Whatever way we can help you get your story out, I think that's very important. But I don't want to end there because I think the last thing we need to talk about that's really important, and I want all of you to kind of get in on this in kind of a group discussion. I can't really help in this area. What is the most important advice we can give to people? So there's people watching right now that have been sexually abused, that are hurting. They may be 10 years old, they may be 30 years old, they may be 53. What's the advice we need to give them? What do they need to hear right now? Because they're closed up, like you said, they're an island. They're like in some cases pushing people away. What do we need to tell them? What do they need to hear?
You are not alone.
That would be.
It's like, honestly, 100%, you are so not alone. And start small. You tell your story to one person that you trust.
Baby steps.
Baby steps, and then it just snowballs from there, and then you just start telling it more and more, and it's super difficult at the start, but then it slowly starts getting a little bit easier.
So you had talked about, Wendy, going through that and initiating that process and concern about what your peripheral, your community would look like, family, friends, that sort of thing. How do you initiate that process? I know that's a very pointed question to your scenario, but how do you initiate that process? And it kind of for everybody. What does that look like when you take that step and go? Who's the first person you talk to? Is it a partner? Is it a loved one? Is it, someone that you maybe are willing to lose in that kind of scenario? What does that look like?
Well, I think it's unique, contingent on who the person is, the individual telling the story. But I wanted to really embrace this concept that it's our story. It's not your story. Right. It's not my story. It's it's our story. We have a collective here that actually we're all impacted by sexual violence in our communities. Right. There isn't a person that is not impacted dramatically. So I think that's really important to recognize that it's not alone. And again, contingent on who the person is will determine, like I'm a little more outspoken, so I'm the type of guy to get up and hold a press conference, perhaps. Right. Whereas somebody else might be a little more passive and a little more less likely to do that. So, but it's all okay. Just don't carry it alone.
Pamela, I see you nodding along there. What, it looks like you have something to add.
I would just agree with John 100% that it's a global problem. It is not an individual's problem. And the only way that we can shatter this silence of sexual abuse is by events like this, by talking, by making it a more normal conversation, making people feel comfortable to talk about what they have gone through, so that we can hold the people accountable that need to be held accountable, that children feel safe, that there are places that they can talk to people and go to and be heard and be listened and get the help. So it isn't just my problem, my experience. It was a community that I grew up in, and that was a problem. And until we make those changes and accept the fact that it is a problem, both with boys and girls, men and women, genders of all, that it's happening within all religion circles, within all cultures, within any kind of socioeconomic background of families. And so until we can say, yeah, we're all a part of this problem, then I don't think that the change will happen. But when we say, yeah, you're not alone, and this is our problem to carry with you, and this is how we can change it, and this is how we can make children feel safe, then change can happen, and then we carry each other.
I think that's an important message that you're saying, that like you guys are a team. You all work together.
Unfortunately, it's a community of
Community.
abuse survivors.
Right.
But again, hitting home that you're not alone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once you come out, once your story, you're embraced by the community that has been there, and it's a community that would never reject you, would only lift you up and help you tell your own story. I kind of wanted to get into that with you, Pam, because you and I had a conversation during one of our podcast interviews about how you were worried because there were people still alive that you were worried would be disappointed by the information, that, because they would maybe not believe you was one of the things, but also the fact that you were degrading someone that these people loved.
Right.
And so if there's people out there that, I'm sure they're in that situation where it's like, but it's my dad, but it's my priest, but it's my mom, but it's my teacher who everyone in the community loves.
Right.
Like, everyone loves them. Everyone thinks that they're the greatest. So what do I do with that? What do they do with that? What do you think?
It's a tough one. I have people that are, within my family and extended family that are not ready to read my book because they can't handle the truth
Right.
of what these abusers have done because of the esteem that they have had them held in for their experiences and in their lifetime. I think that that's what makes familial abuse and abuse with people that are not strangers, whether it's our pastors, our priests, our family members, so difficult, because that is where the confusion lies. There were really great things and experiences that my abusers gave to me as well. If they were just evil, it would have been really easy to hate them. But the confusion lies in the fact that they come to us with goodness, with kindness, and with monstrosities of abuse. And so if we as survivors understand that, I think that those of us that are struggling to understand and wrap ourselves around that piece of an abuser that maybe they're just learning about, we have to extend that grace. I think that the difficult piece is when they're absolutely unwilling to believe or hear what we have to say. But if someone is struggling and someone is at a place with confusion but my experience was this, it's like, yeah, I get that. I had days with that guy too. Unfortunately, I had really horrific days with him in this way. And so there's a lot of grace that needs to be handed out to people because we're all in different stages. And when I shared my story, I had been out with my story, with my therapist, with my supporters for years. Some people just found out about it when they saw my book in print. And so that's a very different place to be where I am right now, and grace needs to be extended.
I think grace is such a beautiful way of expressing that. And it's something that I don't think a lot of people understand what grace is. And you say it so beautifully. Closure, and I think that's a terrible way of putting this, or a terrible verbiage for it. But what does justice look like? What does closure look like? What does the end of the story? What is the next chapter in your story, in your process, and that sort of thing? What does that look like? How does grace factor into that?
For me, it's just, I'm moving forward as, a kind, gentle person that's hopefully, going to go spread that out. And, our story will always be there. That narrative's never going to change. It happened, it's history, and it's always going to be there. And, holding that person accountable is part of it, but that doesn't heal, that doesn't end anything, because they have their own narrative as well, and they have their own reasons and excuses, and, whatever it is looks like for them. I don't know, I've never been that person, but for me now it's just moving forward, and being compassionate and being kind. Know that every one of us here has a story of some sort, and mine isn't bigger than yours, and vice versa. It's all just different.
I think that's amazing. Thank you so much, Pamela, John, Dave, and Wendy. So much great information, and I know that there's a person out there right now that's life is forever changed because of you beautiful people came on this show right now and reached out to them and told them that the journey is long, but it's survivable, and on the other end there's some success. And I just want to thank you, because from the bottom of my heart, every person I can help, it's my life's mission, Soaring Profits' life's mission, to help people out there. And I think it's beautiful that you came along and helped us and helped Recovery Speaking Initiative. And I just want to thank you so much. I think it's amazing.
Yep. So you can't say it any better than that. This is a situation in which, Rob McCabe, Lisa Browning have brought us down here. This panel of people that have had such an impactful view on us, your writing, the beautiful things that you're putting out into the world. I think that's a great way to wrap up for this afternoon. And myself, I want to thank all of you at home. This has been a process that for us has been a spiritual journey of sense, where James and myself diving into this, trying to figure out how to elaborate and share these intricate stories that are powerful, but are sensitive. Like these topics are not easy to talk about. So I want to thank all of you at home for joining us and allowing this to be a platform that Soaring Profits with Recovery Speaking Initiative and everyone else that's involved in this process, our tech guys, our lighting guys, all of the folks here today, it's been a beautiful journey, and I can't thank you guys enough. What you're doing out there and shedding that light for people, it truly is a beautiful thing. And we talked about grace. I can't wrap that up any better than this is a beautiful piece of grace. And I want to thank all of you. This has been a crazy process, and as always, folks, let's make some money together. And James, with your sign off.
Let's heal our minds, bodies, and souls.
Thanks again, folks. We appreciate you.